Have you ever felt someone pull you incredibly close, only to slowly disappear the moment things started getting real? Think about it. At first, everything feels different with them. The connection feels rare. Conversations flow for hours. They open up just enough to make you believe something meaningful is growing between you. You start thinking, maybe this person is finally different. But then something strange begins to happen. The warmth fades, the energy changes, messages become shorter, plans become uncertain, and you're left sitting there, replaying every conversation in your mind, wondering what went wrong. Was it something you said? Something you did? Or was the distance already written into the story long before you arrived? Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never realize. Some people don't just pull away when intimacy appears. They quietly build entire systems to avoid it, and in many cases, those systems involve multiple emotional connections happening at the same time. Not because they're villains, not because they wake up planning to hurt people, but because their mind has learned a powerful survival strategy. Stay connected, but never completely attached. This is the hidden world of avoidant attachment, and it operates in ways most people never notice. On the surface, avoidants can look charming, attentive, even deeply interested. They know how to create moments that feel intense and meaningful, moments that make you feel seen. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. Intensity can happen quickly. It can appear suddenly. It can feel electric. Real closeness, though, grows slowly. It requires vulnerability. It requires emotional risk. And for someone with strong avoidant patterns, emotional risk feels like danger. Somewhere in their past, closeness became associated with pressure, disappointment, or losing control. Their nervous system learned something very specific. Connection is good until it becomes too real. So the moment emotional depth begins to grow, a silent alarm goes off in their mind. Not consciously, not dramatically, but instinctively. Their brain begins searching for space. Sometimes that space looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like sudden busyness. Sometimes it shows up as emotional walls that weren't there before. But often, it appears in a quieter way. They begin spreading their emotional energy across multiple people, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes these connections are subtle, conversations that stay just ambiguous enough, flirtation that never fully crosses a line, emotional bonds that live in gray areas. Each connection provides something slightly different. One person brings comfort, another brings excitement, someone else offers validation. No single relationship carries all the emotional weight, and that's the key. Because when emotional weight is divided, nothing becomes overwhelming. No one gets close enough to trigger the fear that real intimacy creates. This is how the system protects itself. When one connection starts feeling intense, attention quietly shifts somewhere else. When one person asks deeper questions, another conversation provides an easier escape. From the outside, it may look like someone simply exploring options, but internally, something much deeper is happening. Their mind is trying to maintain control. Control over closeness, control over vulnerability, control over the possibility of being emotionally exposed. And the strange part is this: many avoidants don't even realize they're doing it. To them, it doesn't feel like strategy. It doesn't feel manipulative. It simply feels like breathing space, like freedom, like keeping life balanced. But beneath that sense of balance lies something more complicated. Because every time connection gets redirected instead of deepened, something important gets delayed. True intimacy, the kind that requires staying present when emotions get uncomfortable, the kind that asks two people to face vulnerability together instead of quietly escaping it. And when that moment keeps getting avoided, the pattern repeats itself again and again. Different faces, different relationships, but the same invisible distance hiding underneath it all. And this is where the pattern quietly grows stronger, because the moment emotional weight is divided between multiple connections, the pressure disappears. Nothing feels too intense, nothing feels too demanding. Everything stays just manageable enough. For someone who fears emotional engulfment, that balance feels safe. One person provides comfort during lonely moments. Another sparks excitement when life feels dull. Someone else offers admiration when self-doubt creeps in. Each connection fills a small emotional gap, but none of them are allowed to see the entire picture. Not because there is some grand scheme, not because there is always a conscious plan. Often it's automatic. A reflex built deep inside the nervous system. If one relationship begins asking for deeper commitment, something inside tightens. The mind senses emotional gravity forming. Expectations start appearing. The possibility of losing independence begins to feel real. And that's when attention quietly shifts somewhere else. Another message thread lights up. Another conversation becomes more engaging. Another person suddenly receives more attention. Relief arrives almost instantly. The emotional intensity drops. The pressure fades. Control returns. To the outside world, it can look confusing. One moment they seem fully invested. The next moment they seem distracted, distant, unreachable. But inside their mind, it feels like survival. Avoidants often experience intimacy as a slow loss of freedom. Not freedom in the dramatic sense, but emotional breathing room. The closer someone gets, the more the nervous system interprets it as a potential trap. So the brain adapts. Instead of allowing one bond to grow deep roots, it spreads attention across several smaller ones. Each connection stays lighter, less demanding, easier to step away from. This creates a strange illusion. They appear socially connected. They may even appear emotionally available at times. Conversations can feel meaningful. Moments can feel genuine. But the depth always has a ceiling. Just when the relationship approaches that ceiling, distance begins creeping in. Sometimes it looks like delayed responses. Sometimes like sudden busyness. Sometimes like subtle emotional withdrawal that's hard to explain. And the other person feels it immediately. The warmth that once felt effortless begins to feel conditional. Conversations that once felt easy now feel like work. Questions start forming in the mind. What changed? Why does it suddenly feel like I'm the only one leaning in? This is the moment many people blame themselves. They search through their behavior, trying to find the mistake that caused the shift. But often the shift was never about them. It was about the growing closeness itself. Because closeness is the exact moment the avoidant nervous system becomes uncomfortable. The deeper the emotional connection grows, the louder the internal alarm becomes. Vulnerability starts to feel like exposure. Dependence starts to feel like risk. And risk is something the avoidant mind learned to avoid long ago, so the system activates again. Energy gets redirected. Attention gets divided. Emotional intensity gets diluted across different connections, not as cruelty, as protection. But protection has consequences. Every time real intimacy begins to form and the mind escapes instead of staying present, something important is postponed. The experience of being fully known by one person. The experience of building trust slowly and deeply over time. Instead, relationships stay in cycles of excitement, followed by distance, passion followed by withdrawal, connection followed by confusion. For the people on the receiving end, it can feel like emotional whiplash. One moment they feel chosen, the next moment they feel optional, and that emotional uncertainty keeps them chasing the connection even harder, hoping the warmth will return, hoping the distance will fade. But the pattern keeps repeating. because the avoidant mind is not trying to build intimacy. It is trying to regulate fear, fear of losing independence, fear of emotional dependency, fear of being hurt or overwhelmed if someone gets too close. So it keeps relationships hovering in a carefully controlled middle zone, close enough to feel connection, distant enough to stay safe. And the longer this pattern continues, the harder it becomes to break, because the system starts rewarding itself. Every time emotional pressure rises and they redirect their attention somewhere else, the discomfort disappears. The nervous system relaxes. The mind feels in control again. That relief becomes addictive. Without realizing it, they train themselves to escape intimacy the moment it begins demanding something deeper. At first, the consequences are invisible. Life still feels exciting. There are always new conversations, new sparks, new possibilities. Attention flows from different directions, creating the illusion of abundance. But beneath that surface, something slowly starts changing. Depth becomes unfamiliar. Real intimacy requires staying present when emotions become complicated. It requires tolerating moments of uncertainty. It asks two people to face vulnerability together instead of running from it. But someone trapped in the avoidance cycle rarely stays long enough for that process to unfold. The moment discomfort appears, the instinct is to step away. And over time, something painful begins to happen. The ability to tolerate closeness weakens. The mind becomes more sensitive to emotional intensity. Even small signs of commitment can start feeling overwhelming. Simple expectations can feel like pressure, so the pattern accelerates. Connections become shorter. Emotional investment becomes lighter. Distance becomes easier and easier to create. On the outside, it can look like someone who simply enjoys freedom or independence, someone who avoids labels or prefers casual connections. But deep down, something else is happening. A quiet loneliness begins forming, not the loud kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone, the deeper kind that comes from never feeling truly known by another person, because being known requires letting someone see the unguarded parts, the fears, the insecurities, the imperfections that most people hide. And that level of exposure feels unbearable to someone whose mind associates vulnerability with danger. So instead, they stay partially hidden. They show fragments of themselves to different people, never allowing one person to see the entire picture. A little here, a little there. Enough to maintain connection, but never enough to lose control. At first, this feels like protection. But eventually, protection turns into isolation. Imagine living surrounded by conversations, attention, and relationships, yet still feeling like no one truly understands you. Imagine always keeping one foot out the door, always preparing for distance, always maintaining an escape route. That constant vigilance is exhausting. And the strange thing is, many avoidants don't fully recognize the loneliness growing inside them. They simply feel restless, dissatisfied, like something meaningful is always just out of reach. So they search again. Another connection, another spark, another moment of excitement that briefly fills the emotional space. But excitement fades. And when it does, the same cycle begins again. Because the real problem was never the partner. It was the fear sitting beneath the connection, fear of being dependent, fear of losing autonomy, fear that true closeness might eventually lead to pain. These fears quietly shape behavior without ever announcing themselves. They whisper instead, "Stay guarded. Don't give too much. Keep your options open. And if things start feeling too real, step back." The tragedy is that the very strategy designed to avoid emotional pain often creates it in a different form. A life full of connections that never become anchors, moments of closeness that never evolve into lasting trust, relationships that always hover at the surface, never diving deep enough to transform either person involved. But the most powerful realization is this: patterns like this are learned, which means they can also be unlearned. The moment someone begins recognizing the pattern, the moment they see how fear has been quietly directing their choices, something shifts inside. Awareness breaks the automatic cycle, because once the mind sees what it's been doing, it can no longer pretend it's accidental, and that awareness becomes the first real step towards something far more powerful than control: real connection. And once awareness begins, the illusion starts cracking. Suddenly, the pattern that once felt normal begins to look different. The constant shifting between connections, the quiet urge to pull away the moment emotions deepen, the habit of keeping people just close enough, but never close enough to truly see everything. It becomes harder to ignore, because awareness removes the comfort of unconscious behavior. It forces the mind to confront a difficult truth. Avoiding intimacy does not eliminate pain, it only delays it. Every connection that never reaches its full depth leaves something unfinished. Every moment of closeness that gets interrupted creates emotional residue, pieces of connection scattered across different people, different moments, different endings. Over time, those unfinished pieces start to weigh more than expected. The excitement that once masked the emptiness loses its strength. New conversations stop feeling as thrilling as they once did. The chase becomes repetitive. Different faces, same cycle. And somewhere inside, a quiet realization begins forming. Freedom without emotional safety is not real freedom. It's just distance disguised as independence. Real independence is the ability to stay present when emotions become uncomfortable. Real strength is the ability to remain open, even when vulnerability feels risky. That kind of strength cannot grow while constantly escaping connection. It only develops by facing it, by allowing someone to see the parts of you that feel uncertain, by staying when conversations become deeper than expected, by resisting the instinct to run the moment your heart feels exposed. For someone trapped in avoidant patterns, this feels terrifying at first. The nervous system reacts as if danger is approaching. The mind searches for familiar escape routes. Old habits whisper their usual advice: create distance, redirect attention, protect yourself. But awareness introduces a new possibility: choice. The moment you recognize the pattern, you are no longer completely controlled by it. The urge to escape may still appear, but now you can see it for what it is: a reflex from the past, not a command you must obey. And that single shift changes everything, because real connection becomes possible only when someone chooses to stay instead of running. Stay in the conversation that feels uncomfortable. Stay when emotions grow deeper than expected. Stay when the instinct to disappear begins pulling at your thoughts. Each moment of staying rewires something inside the mind. The nervous system slowly learns that closeness is not the threat it once believed it was. Trust begins forming in small, quiet ways, not through dramatic gestures, through consistency, through showing up again after vulnerability appears, through allowing someone to know your fears instead of hiding them behind distance. And something remarkable happens when that process begins. The loneliness that once lived beneath the surface starts fading, because true intimacy does something no collection of surface connections ever can. It allows two people to feel fully seen, not partially understood, not temporarily admired. Seen, the guarded parts, the uncertain parts, the imperfect parts, and still accepted. That experience is powerful enough to reshape how someone understands connection itself. It proves that closeness does not have to mean losing yourself. It proves that vulnerability does not automatically lead to pain. It can lead to belonging. But this shift only happens when the pattern is interrupted, when the cycle of running, redirecting, and dividing attention finally stops long enough for something deeper to grow. And that moment begins with a simple realization. The strategies that once protected you may now be the very things preventing the connection you secretly want the most. Because real intimacy cannot grow in divided attention. It grows where presence is undistracted, where emotional walls slowly lower, where two people choose depth over escape. And that choice, once made, changes the entire direction of the story. And the moment that choice appears, everything becomes clearer. Because for the first time, the pattern stops feeling mysterious. The sudden distance, the divided attention, the quiet juggling of emotional connections, it all begins to make sense. Not as a puzzle you failed to solve, but as a pattern that was never built for closeness in the first place. And that realization changes the way you see everything. You stop chasing the version of someone you saw in the beginning. You stop waiting for the intensity to return the way it once felt. You stop blaming yourself for the emotional shift that left you confused. Because you finally understand something powerful. You cannot build deep connection with someone who survives by avoiding depth. It doesn't matter how patient you are. It doesn't matter how understanding you try to be. It doesn't matter how carefully you adjust your behavior to make them comfortable. If someone is constantly escaping intimacy, the relationship will always stay trapped in the same cycle. Moments of closeness, followed by distance, hope rising, then confusion returning again. And if you keep trying to prove your worth inside that cycle, something dangerous begins to happen. You slowly abandon yourself. You begin shrinking your needs, lowering your expectations, convincing yourself that crumbs of attention should feel like enough. But they never do. Because deep down, your heart knows the difference between temporary excitement and real connection. Your heart knows the difference between someone who visits your life and someone who chooses to stay. This is the moment where the real shift begins, not by changing them, by changing what you accept. When you recognize the pattern, you stop chasing people who fear intimacy more than they desire it. You stop investing emotional energy into connections that keep you permanently uncertain. You stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional safety. Because the truth is simple, even if it's hard to accept. Real connection does not feel like constant guessing. Real connection does not require you to compete with hidden conversations or divided attention. Real connection grows through consistency, honesty, and presence. It grows when someone leans in during difficult conversations instead of disappearing. It grows when vulnerability is met with openness instead of withdrawal. And most importantly, it grows when both people are brave enough to stay. Not just during the exciting moments, but during the uncomfortable ones too. The truth is, many avoidant patterns continue not because they are unstoppable, but because people around them keep trying to earn closeness from someone who is still afraid of it. The cycle survives through hope. Hope that the distance will fade. Hope that the connection will suddenly deepen. Hope that if you just love them the right way, the walls will finally fall. But love cannot break a pattern someone is not ready to face themselves. Only awareness can do that. Only the decision to confront fear instead of escaping it can change the story. And once you understand this, your focus shifts. Instead of trying to fix someone else's emotional defenses, you begin protecting your own emotional energy. You begin choosing relationships where presence is mutual, where effort flows in both directions, where connection grows stronger instead of more confusing over time. Because the most powerful relationships are not built on intensity. They are built on emotional courage. Two people willing to face closeness without running from it. Two people willing to stay present even when vulnerability appears. Two people choosing depth instead of escape. And when you experience that kind of connection, something remarkable happens. The chaos disappears. The guessing stops. And for the first time, love stops feeling like something you have to chase and starts feeling like something that finally chose you.